The year was 2147, and for the first time in human history, Earth wasn't alone at the negotiating table. Not just alone, but surrounded. Floating in the quiet dark near a distant star called Lyra, aboard a massive space station named Epsilon Prime, representatives from every major nation on Earth had gathered. They weren't there to argue over oil borders or trade deals. This time, the stakes were bigger than anything humanity had ever faced. They were there to talk peace, with beings from other worlds. The station itself was a marvel of cooperation, built not by humans but by a group of 6 alien species, known collectively as the Kailari Concord. Tall, calm, and precise in everything they did, the Kailari had been watching Earth for decades. They'd seen the wars, the climate disasters, the moments of cruelty, but also the moments of courage, the rescues, the music, the quiet acts of kindness that never made headlines. Still, they remained cautious. To them, humanity was like a child holding a live wire, full of potential, but dangerously unpredictable. When the human delegation arrived, scientists, diplomats, and a few military advisors in formal uniforms, they were met with silence. No fanfare, no greetings. Just a long, smooth corridor leading to the central chamber where the talks would happen. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something metallic, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. Everyone walked slowly, trying to hide their nerves. Some of them had spent their whole lives studying alien signals, dreaming of this moment. Others just hoped they wouldn't say the wrong thing and accidentally start a war. Inside the chamber, the Kailari waited. They didn't sit in chairs. Instead, they stood in a loose circle, their slender forms glowing softly under the station's gentle lighting. Their faces were hard to read, smooth with large dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When they spoke, their voices were calm, almost musical, but carried a weight that made every word feel final. The Kailari's offer was simple, at least on the surface. They wanted peace, but with conditions. Earth would have to shut down its orbital defense grid, a network of satellites and laser platforms built after the Mars conflict of 2129. They also wanted the right to inspect Earth's major research labs and military bases, to ensure humanity wasn't developing weapons that could threaten the wider galaxy. In return, they'd share clean energy tech, medical advances, and open limited trade routes. At first, the human side listened politely. But as the details unfolded, the mood shifted. To many on the delegation, the offer didn't feel like partnership. It felt like surrender. It reminded them of old colonial deals from Earth's past, where powerful outsiders came in promising help, but really wanted control. One delegate from Southeast Asia quietly pointed out that his country had spent centuries fighting to keep its own voice. He wasn't about to give it up to beings who barely understood what it meant to lose everything and rebuild. The Kailari ambassador, being with silver blue skin and a voice like wind through, Class responded without anger but with cold clarity. "Your species has a history of turning knowledge into weapons," they said. "You split the atom to power cities and to erase them. You engineered viruses to cure disease and to spread fear. Trust must be earned, not demanded." That's when things started to unravel. A young scientist from South America, usually quiet, stood up. "We've made terrible mistakes," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "But we've also sent probes to other stars, fed billions, healed wounds that once meant death. Isn't growth part of being alive? Shouldn't you give us a chance to prove we've changed?" The Kailari didn't answer right away. Their silence stretched so long that someone coughed nervously. Finally, the ambassador spoke again. "Change must be verified, not hoped for." That word, verified, landed like a stone in still water. It wasn't just about technology. It was about dignity, about whether humanity was seen as equals or as children needing supervision. The head of the human delegation, a woman who'd spent 30 years in diplomacy, tried to find a middle ground. She suggested joint oversight, shared research, phased disarmament, but the Kailari wouldn't budge. Their terms were final. By the third day, it was clear the talks were going nowhere. Tensions ran high. Sleep was scarce. People argued in hushed tones in the corridors, replaying every word, every glance. Some feared that walking away would be seen as aggression. Others believed staying would mean losing Earth's soul. Then came the breaking point. During a closed session, a Kailari analyst presented data showing that Earth's defense grid had been quietly upgraded just months before the summit. capable of targeting ships light minutes away. The implication was clear. Humanity had come to peace talks while sharpening its knives. The human side was stunned. Yes, the upgrades happened, but they were defensive, a response to rumors of pirate raids near Jupiter. Still, the damage was done. Trust, already thin, snapped. The final meeting lasted less than 10 minutes. The Kailari ambassadors stood, their posture stiff. "You speak of trust," they said, "yet you prepare for war even as you offer your hand. The conquered cannot risk galactic stability on hope alone." The human leader didn't shout. She didn't beg. She simply looked the ambassador in the eye and said, "We came here in good faith. If you only see our past, you'll never see our future." With that, the summit ended. As the human delegation boarded their ship to return to Earth, no one spoke. The view from the viewport showed the station shrinking behind them, a bright jewel in the endless black. Below, Earth was just a pale blue dot, but it was home. And now they were going back to a planet that had no idea how close it had come to being cut off from the stars. Back on Earth, the news broke within hours. "Peace talks collapse," read the headlines. Panic spread at first. Stock markets dipped. Emergency alerts buzzed on phones. Parents hugged their kids a little tighter. But something else happened too. In cities and villages, people started gathering. Not in fear, but in quiet defiance. They lit candles, played music, shared meals with strangers. It wasn't organized. It just happened because deep down everyone knew humanity had been judged and found wanting. But they also knew they weren't finished writing their story. And so, as the ship carrying the delegation re-entered Earth's atmosphere, trailing fire like a falling star, millions looked up, not with dread, but with a strange, stubborn hope. The galaxy might not trust them yet. But Earth still believed in itself. After the peace talks fell apart, Earth didn't explode into chaos like some feared it would. There were no riots, no mass panic, no sudden rush to build weapons in backyards. Instead, something quieter and far more human began to happen. At first, people were scared. News channels played the same clips over and over. The cold faces of the alien delegates, the sharp words exchanged, the image of the human ship leaving the space station alone. Social media buzzed with fear. Are they coming for us? Will they blockade Earth? Did we just start a war without firing a shot? Parents held their kids a little tighter at night. Teenagers stared at the stars and wondered if they'd ever get to visit them. But within days, something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion from the fear. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was just the stubborn, messy, beautiful way humans have always found hope, even in the worst moments. It started small. In a town in the mountains of Nepal, a school teacher asked her students to draw what peace looked like to them. The drawings of shared meals, of holding hands across borders, of Earth seen from space were posted online. Within hours, classrooms in Brazil, Kenya, and Canada shared their own. No one organized it. It just spread, like a ripple in a pond. In cities, people began gathering in parks after sunset, not to protest, but to simply be together. Someone would bring a guitar, someone else a pot of soup. Strangers shared stories about their grandparents, about old festivals, about times they helped a neighbor during a storm. These weren't grand political acts. They were just human moments, and somehow that felt like the most powerful answer to the galaxy's doubt. Meanwhile, deep inside the United Terran Accord headquarters, a building that once buzzed with military briefings and crisis meetings, a different kind of plan was taking shape. The leaders knew they couldn't fight the Kailari. Their ships were faster, their tech centuries ahead. But they also knew something the aliens might not. Humans don't always win with weapons. Sometimes they win with truth. So instead of building more defenses, they launched something called Project Loom. Not a weapon, not a shield, just a signal, a continuous open broadcast beamed straight into deep space. No encryption, no filters, no spin. It would show the galaxy exactly who humans were, the good and the bad, the ugly and the kind. At first, many thought it was a waste of time. Why show our weaknesses? Some asked. They'll see our wars, our pollution, our mistakes. But others argued, that's exactly why we should show it, because we don't hide from our past. We learn from it. And so engineers, artists, teachers, farmers, doctors, all kinds of people started contributing. A fisherman in the Philippines recorded the sound of waves at dawn. A grandmother in Greece sang a lullaby her mother taught her. A teenager in Detroit filmed herself fixing a broken robot in her garage, laughing when it finally moved. There were clips of hospital workers hugging after a long shift, of volunteers planting trees in scorched forests, of children learning sign language so they could talk to a new classmate who couldn't hear, but they didn't leave out the hard parts either. The broadcast included black and white footage of old wars, interviews with survivors of natural disasters, even raw footage of protests where people demanded justice. The message wasn't "we're perfect," it was "this is us," flawed, trying, and still here. Back on the streets, life went on, but with a new sense of purpose. People started looking at each other differently. Arguments still happened, of course. Traffic jams, power outages, misunderstandings, those didn't vanish. But there was a quiet awareness now, like everyone was part of something bigger. When someone cut in line at the market, another person might just smile and say, "Hey, we're all Earthlings today." It wasn't forced. It just felt natural. Schools changed too. History lessons didn't just focus on battles and treaties anymore. Teachers talked about moments of cooperation, how countries came together after earthquakes, how scientists from rival nations worked side by side to stop a virus, how artists from different cultures created something new by listening to each other. Kids began asking, "Well, what can I add to the broadcast?" Some recorded poems. Others filmed time lapses of sunflowers growing in their windowsills. One group in rural India sent in a video of their whole village dancing during a rainstorm, barefoot and laughing. Even the news started to shift. Instead of only showing conflict, some channels began ending their broadcasts with a short segment called "One Good Thing," a small act of kindness, a scientific breakthrough, a rescued animal, a repaired bridge. It wasn't propaganda. It was just balance, because the truth is, bad news spreads fast, but good news, it takes root, and all of it, the songs, the silence, the tears, the laughter, was being stitched together second by second into the biggest message Earth had ever sent. Not a threat, not a plea, just a mirror. Some scientists worried the Kailari wouldn't understand. "They think in logic," one said. "What will they make of a child's drawing or a folk song?" But another replied, "Maybe that's the point. Maybe they need to see that logic isn't the only way to be wise." As the days passed, the fear didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became less about what will they do to us, and more about will they finally see us? Not as soldiers or savages, but as people who cry at sunsets, who stay up late worrying about their parents, who plant gardens they'll never see bloom, just so someone else can enjoy them. And in homes across the planet, people began doing something simple but powerful. They looked up at the night sky and whispered, not in fear, but in hope. "We're still here, and we're more than our worst days." No one knew if the Kailari were listening. No one knew if it would change anything. But for the first time in a long time, Earth wasn't trying to prove it was strong. It was trying to prove it was real. And sometimes being real is the bravest thing you can be. For 3 full days, Earth's message poured into space like a river of light and sound. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a demand. It was life, raw, unedited, and unfiltered. And somewhere out there in the cold silence between stars, the Kailari were watching. At first, they didn't know what to make of it. Their ships, sleek and silent as shadows, had long monitored Earth's radio chatter, military codes, news broadcasts, pop songs, emergency alerts. But this was different. There were no hidden signals, no coded threats. Just a child in a rain-soaked village laughing as she chased a chicken. A welder in a snowy port city humming an old tune while fixing a broken crane. A group of elders sharing tea under a banyan tree, their hands wrinkled but steady, their voices soft with years of stories. The Kailari had studied human history. They knew about the wars, the bombs, the centuries of division, but they'd never seen humans just being, not performing, not pretending, just living. In their own society, emotion was controlled, measured, rarely displayed in public. Feelings were private, almost like secrets. To see humans cry openly at funerals, then dance wildly at weddings, sometimes within the same week, confused their analysts. One Kailari scientist replayed a clip of a young boy comforting his little sister after she scraped her knee. The boy didn't just hand her a bandage. He made a silly face, told a joke, and held her hand until she stopped crying. The scientist watched it 7 times, then quietly asked a colleague, "Is this strategy or something else?" Back on Earth, no one knew if their message was getting through, but they kept sending it anyway. Because this wasn't about convincing aliens anymore. It had become something deeper, a promise to themselves. A reminder that even when the universe doubted them, they wouldn't forget who they were. The broadcast showed everything. A farmer in drought-stricken land sharing his last bucket of water with a neighbor. A classroom in a war-torn region where kids still raise their hands to answer questions, their eyes bright with curiosity despite the cracks in the walls. A video from a hospital where doctors from 3 different countries worked side by side, saving a life with no thought of borders. But it also showed the hard truths. Footage of wildfires swallowing forests, interviews with people who'd lost homes to floods, a quiet moment in a memorial park where someone placed a single flower beside a name carved in stone. The message didn't hide pain. It honored it. And in doing so, it showed something the Kailari had never seen before. A species that didn't run from its wounds, but tended to them. Together, on the Kalari homeworld, deep in their crystalline cities, something unusual began to happen. Young Kailari, those who'd only known logic and order, started asking questions their elders couldn't answer. Why do they sing when they're sad? Why do they build art from broken things? Why do they keep trying even when they fail? One night, a junior observer, assigned to monitor the Earth feed, stayed long after their shift ended. They watched a clip of a street musician playing a violin in an empty subway station. Rain tapped on the glass above. The music was slow, a little sad, but beautiful. The observer didn't understand the notes, but something in their chest tightened. They didn't have a word for it. Not yet. Meanwhile, on Earth, people began noticing small changes in their own lives. Neighbors who used to ignore each other now waved. Strangers helped carry groceries. Communities organized cleanup days, not because someone told them to, but because they wanted to leave something better behind. It wasn't perfect. Arguments still flared. Mistakes still happened. But there was a new gentleness in the air, like everyone was trying a little harder. Not for the aliens, but for each other. Then, something unexpected happened. A faint signal came back. Not a message. Not a threat. Just a single, repeating tone, soft, almost musical, embedded in the static between stars. Earth scientists scrambled to decode it. At first they thought it was interference, but then they realized it matched the frequency of a lullaby that had been part of the broadcast. A simple tune, sung by an old woman in a coastal village passed down through generations. No one claimed responsibility. No official Kalari channel acknowledged it, but the tone kept coming every few hours like a quiet echo. Hope flickered. People started leaving their windows open at night, just in case they could hear something, anything from the sky. Of course, sound doesn't travel in space, but it didn't matter. It was the idea that counted. The idea that someone, somewhere, was listening. In schools, kids drew pictures of the Kailari, not as monsters or judges, but as curious beings with big eyes and gentle hands. They wrote letters they knew would never be sent. Thank you for listening. We're sorry for the hurt we've caused. We're trying to be better. And Earth kept broadcasting, a fisherman mending his nets at sunrise, a baker pulling fresh bread from the oven, a group of teenagers teaching an old man how to use a tablet so he could see his grandkids, a protest where people held candles instead of signs, a scientist crying when her experiment finally worked, not out of pride but relief that it might help someone. The Kalari analysts struggled to categorize it all. Was this propaganda? A psychological tactic? But the more they watched, the less it felt like a performance. Humans didn't act differently when the camera was on. They argued, hugged, stumbled, laughed, cried, all with the same honesty. One Kalari philosopher, known for their rigid views, requested access to the full archive. Days later, they emerged silent. When asked what they'd learned, they simply said, "They do not hide their fractures. They let light through them." Back on Earth, no one celebrated. There was no victory parade. But there was a quiet pride, a sense that they'd spoken their truth, not with weapons or warnings, but with open hands. And as the 3rd day of the broadcast ended, the signal didn't stop. It kept flowing, steady, patient, human, because the message wasn't meant to end. It was meant to continue, not as a plea for acceptance, but as a declaration. This is who we are. Take it or leave it, but don't mistake our kindness for weakness or our tears for surrender. Somewhere in the dark, a Kalari ship drifted, its sensors tuned to Earth's frequency. Inside, a single observer played the lullaby again, softly, just once, and for the first time wondered what it might feel like to sing along. The silence that followed was heavier than anyone expected. After 3 days of Earth's broadcast, filled with laughter, lullabies, arguments, and acts of quiet courage, the signal didn't stop. But the response from the Kalari did, the soft musical tone that had echoed back like a whisper in the dark. It vanished. No official message came. No ships approached. No signals, no warnings, no thanks, just nothing. On Earth, people tried not to read too much into it. Maybe they're thinking, some said. Maybe they're scared, others whispered. But deep down, a new kind of fear settled in, not the sharp panic of invasion, but the slow ache of being ignored. Like shouting into a canyon and hearing no echo at all. Meanwhile, far from Earth, in the gleaming halls of the Kalari High Synod, chaos simmered beneath perfect order. The elders had gathered in their chamber of polished crystal, where light bent in strange, calming patterns. Normally, decisions were made quickly, cleanly, with logic as their only guide. But this time, nothing was simple. The footage from Earth had spread through their networks faster than anyone predicted. Not just among scientists and diplomats, but among students, artists, even children in learning pods. Clips of human street festivals, of parents teaching kids to ride bikes, of strangers sharing umbrellas in the rain. These images had slipped into Kalari culture like water through cracks in stone. And that terrified the leadership. To the Synod, emotion was a flaw. Vulnerability, a risk. But Earth's broadcast hadn't just shown emotion, it had shown emotion as strength. Humans cried, then got back up. They failed, then tried again. They hurt each other, then apologized. To the Kalari, this wasn't just strange, it was dangerous. Because if feelings could drive progress, then their entire system, built on control, precision, and emotional restraint, might be incomplete. Worse, rumors began spreading through the outer colonies. A mining outpost near the Orion Rim reported that young workers had started gathering after shifts to share stories, mimicking what they'd seen in the Earth feed. On a research moon orbiting Vega, a group of engineers built a small garden not for food, but just to see something grow. These acts seemed harmless. But to the Synod they were sparks, and sparks in the right wind could become fire. In a closed session, the high speaker stood before the council. Their voice, usually calm as still water, carried an edge. We opened a channel to observe a species. Instead, they have infected us with uncertainty. One elder objected. They showed us truth. Is truth infection? Their truth is chaos, came the reply. It has no structure, no discipline. If we allow this to spread, our young will begin to question everything, our laws, our ways, our very purpose. After hours of debate, a decision was made, not with votes, but with silence. When no one spoke against it, the order stood. Sol system would be placed under observation quarantine. All communication with Earth was to cease. All data from the broadcast was to be sealed. And any Kalari caught sharing or replicating human cultural material would face re-education. It was meant to be the end of the matter. But orders don't always stick, especially when hearts have already been touched. One Kalari, a low-ranking archivist assigned to catalog the Earth feed, couldn't bring themselves to delete it. They'd watched a clip of a human grandmother teaching her grandchild to knead dough, hands covered in flour, laughter filling the kitchen. There was no goal, no outcome, just presence, just love, and in that moment something shifted inside them. So instead of erasing the files, they copied them, not onto official servers, but onto a small unmarked data crystal, something easily hidden, easily carried. They didn't know why. Maybe hope, maybe rebellion, or maybe just the simple need to keep something beautiful from being lost. Back on Earth, life went on, but the mood had changed. Without any word from the stars, people turned inward. Some grew bitter. We showed them our soul and they turned away, they muttered. Others doubled down on kindness, as if proving a point to an audience that wasn't watching. Community gardens expanded. Neighborhoods started skill shares, where people taught each other how to fix bikes, sew clothes, or grow food. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about dignity. Schools began new lessons, not just about science or history, but about listening. About how to sit with someone who's hurting without trying to fix them. About how to say, I was wrong. Teachers said these weren't just human values, they were Earth values. And if the galaxy couldn't see that, then Earth would live them anyway. Still, the silence from space weighed heavy. At night, people looked up and wondered, did we say too much? Or not enough? Then, weeks later, something small happened. A deep space monitoring station near Jupiter picked up a faint encrypted burst, not from the Kailari homeworld, but from the edge of their territory. It lasted less than a second. When decoded, it contained only two things: the full Earth broadcast archive and a single line of text in plain human language. We see you. No signature, no return address. Just those three words. Scientists argued over its origin. Was it a trick? A test? A glitch? But most people didn't care about the source. They cared about the message. Because after weeks of silence, someone had looked at all of Earth's messiness, the tears, the fights, the burnt toast, the broken promises, and hadn't looked away. That night, more people than ever gathered outside, not in fear, not in celebration, just in quiet solidarity. Some lit candles. Others played music. A few just stood, hands in pockets, staring at the stars like old friends. No one knew what would come next. The Kailari leadership still saw humanity as a threat, not because of weapons, but because of ideas. Because humans dared to be soft in a hard universe. Because they believed that showing your wounds wasn't weakness, it was an invitation to heal together. And that was more frightening to the powerful than any army, but Earth didn't stop broadcasting. The signal kept flowing, steady, patient, human. A fisherman casting his net at dawn, a student solving a math problem with a grin, a nurse holding the hand of someone taking their last breath, life in all its ordinary glory. Because the truth was, Earth didn't need the galaxy's approval to be itself. But if even one being out there had been moved, if even one heart had opened, then the message had already done its job. And somewhere, in the vast dark between stars, a single Kailari held a small crystal in their palm, feeling its warmth and wondered if courage could be contagious. Months passed and the stars stayed quiet. No official message came from the Kailari conquered. No ships appeared in Earth's orbit. No demands, no threats, not even a simple, "We received your signal." To the outside universe, it looked like Earth had been forgotten, written off as too chaotic, too emotional, too human to be trusted. But on Earth, something had already changed. People weren't waiting for permission to be kind anymore. They weren't broadcasting for an audience in the stars. They were living for each other right here, right now. Cities buzzed with a different kind of energy. Community centers turned into places where elders taught young people how to cook traditional meals, fix old radios, or stitch torn clothes. Schools didn't just teach facts. They taught how to listen, how to disagree without shouting, how to say "I don't know" and mean it. Rooftops became gardens. Abandoned lots became playgrounds. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments, still mistakes, but there was also a quiet understanding that healing wasn't a single act. It was a daily choice, and Earth kept sending its signal into the void, not because they expected a reply, but because it had become part of who they were now. A fisherman in the morning mist. A child drawing chalk rainbows on the sidewalk. A group of neighbors rebuilding a home after a storm. Passing tools hand to hand without being asked. The broadcast wasn't propaganda. It was just life, lived honestly, openly, without armor. Then, slowly, something strange began to happen far beyond Earth. On the outer edges of known space, where the Kailari's influence thinned and younger species lived in the shadows of older empires, whispers started to spread. A mining colony near Proxima B reported that a Kailari supply ship had arrived. But instead of delivering parts, it played a human folk song over its comms before drifting away. No explanation, just melody. On a dusty moon orbiting a red dwarf star, a group of young engineers, raised on strict logic and efficiency, began leaving small handmade tokens on each other's workstations. A carved stone, a folded paper bird, a single flower grown in a recycled can. When questioned, one simply said, "We saw it in the Earth archive. It felt right." Even more puzzling, some distant outposts started broadcasting their own signals, not to Earth but into the wider galaxy. Short clips of their daily lives, a shared meal, a repair job done together, a lullaby sung in a language no one outside their world had ever heard. These signals weren't polished. They were raw, shaky, full of mistakes. But they carried the same spirit as Earth's message. This is us. Not perfect, but real. Back on Earth, no one knew about these ripples. But they felt them somehow. In the way strangers smiled more, in the way people paused before speaking, in the quiet pride of knowing they'd chosen truth over fear. Life went on. Children grew. Seasons turned. Scientists kept working not just on engines and energy, but on ways to share knowledge freely. Open-source designs for clean water filters, solar panels, medical tools, all uploaded to public networks with one note: use this, improve it, pass it on. One day, a retired diplomat sat on a park bench watching kids play. They weren't playing war. They weren't pretending to be heroes with laser guns. They were building a fort out of cardboard boxes, arguing over who got to be the architect and who got to be the gardener. She smiled. Maybe that was the real victory, not treaties or tech, but the quiet shift in what children dreamed of becoming. Years later, a book appeared in bookstores across Earth. It had no flashy cover, just a plain blue spine and a simple title: We Are Not Alone, But We Are Ourselves. Inside were essays, poems, diary entries, and reflections, not from leaders or generals, but from teachers, farmers, nurses, street sweepers, students, people who'd lived through the silence after the failed summit and chose every day to believe in something better. One passage read, "They thought our emotions made us weak. But it's our grief that teaches us to care. It's our joy that reminds us why we fight to survive. And it's our willingness to show both, without shame, that makes us dangerous to those who only understand control." The galaxy never sent an official apology. No grand alliance was formed, but something deeper had taken root, because fear doesn't always look like weapons. Sometimes it looks like silence. And hope doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it's a lullaby echoing in a distant ship, or a seed planted in dry soil, or a single line of text whispered across light years. We see you. Earth never became a galactic power. It didn't need to. It had already done the hardest thing. It had stayed true to itself when the universe doubted it. And in doing so, it gave others permission to do the same. Now when people look up at night, they don't just see stars. They see possibilities. They wonder if somewhere out there, a young being is watching a clip of Earth's reign, or hearing a grandmother's song, or learning that it's okay to cry and still be strong. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Because humanity's greatest act wasn't building ships that could reach the stars. It was showing the stars that you don't need to be flawless to be worthy. You just need to keep trying, to keep sharing, to keep believing that even in a vast, cold universe, a single honest voice can start a chain reaction of courage. The galaxy may never fully trust Earth, but it can't unsee what it witnessed. And sometimes being seen, truly seen, is the first step toward being understood. So Earth keeps broadcasting. Not for approval, not for peace treaties, but because telling your story, your real story, is how you stay human. And in the end, that was the most frightening, beautiful thing of all.